in listen-only mode.
All right, good morning. My name is Jeremy Grandstaff. I'm the process architect for the Nebraska Walkable Communities Project, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar on master plans. The concept of master plans is really used a lot in advocacy to try to advance or to, if you will, ensure that we've got commonalities within our plans that are going to drive what we're doing to increase walking, biking, and other transportation-related pieces of the equation. And a good master plan is going to allow you as a city the ability to really look at how you're building your city. This is not my area of expertise, thank God, because I'm not the best person to talk about master plans, but we do have 3 people joining us today who are experts in this area in a variety of different ways. And so I'm excited today that Derek Miller is joining us from the Omaha Planning Department, that Chris Danley is joining us from Vitruvian Planning, and of course we have Julie Harris back with us from the Nebraska Bicycling Alliance. And just a big shout out to the 3 of you for lending your time to this conversation and to help our leaders across Nebraska as they're looking at increasing walking, biking, and overall health in their communities, be able to tap into the tool of the master plan as a way to be able to get that done. Before we jump into our presentation, I'm going to ask Julie to put up our poll on the screen, or to open our poll. So Julie, if you want to let me know when that's open.
All right, we should be good.
So the question that we have for you guys as a group is, have you ever been involved in your city's master planning process? And so you can look at your screen there and you can choose yes, no, or I don't know. And we'll give you a second to kind of weigh in with those. It's a good way to just kind of pull the audience, see where we're at in that. And Julie, you should start to see results coming in. Again, make that choice on your screen. And then, Julie, when you're ready or you feel like we've got results coming in, you can always hit close poll. And we'll see where we're at.
All right, we'll just give it a few more seconds here.
All right. So let's get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We kind of have a small group, so we'll see how the poll works here.
All right, we're closed.
All right, Julie, what's our result?
100% no.
Well, thank God you're here today. That's all I can say, because we are going to equip you so that the next time we ask that question, the answer is absolutely yes, and I let it. No, I'm kidding. So let's go ahead and dive in. I want to actually step out of the way of our experts and really allow them the opportunity to talk with you. So what we're going to do is Derek's going to talk a little bit, Julie's going to talk, Chris is going to give some application kind of taking. I love this kind of what we've laid out here, because Derek can kind of get into the background pieces. Julie's going to talk about what we're seeing with some of the master plans across Nebraska. And then Chris's company really does a great job of trying to figure out how to make the master plan really accessible and if you will, real, I think is probably a good way to say it, something that we can experience within our community. And so I'm going to turn it over to Derek to kick us off, but they're going to give you a quick presentation, about 10 minutes apiece, and then at the end we'll open for questions. So if you've got questions, you can always put those into the chat box on your screen. And that's a good way to keep that conversation rolling. If you've got the questions, feel free to put them in there. You can also tweet us your questions at just by sending them in on Twitter with the hashtag WalkInE for Walk Nebraska. So again, if you've got questions, put those into the chat box. You will have an opportunity to ask those at the end, and then you can also send those in via Twitter using hashtag WalkInE. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Derek with a reminder to my other panelists, when you're not talking, put yourself on mute so that we make sure we're cutting down on that background noise. Derek, it's always awesome when you get to serve as a panelist on a call for me. So thank you for being here. Why don't you get us started?
Thanks, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to give a general overview of master plans, and I may say comprehensive plans, and those keywords are interchangeable. So master plan is the same thing as a comprehensive plan. But generally speaking, to kick us off here, master plans, it's all about vision. It's all about the future. One of the best quotes I heard in the last 5 years, and I don't know who said it, but a good way to point this out is the difference between politicians and statesmen. Politicians worry about the next election. Statesmen worry about the next generation. So comp plans, master plans, they're all about the next generation, and it's for us to get the work done. Next slide, please. And comp plans, you could also think of them as a roadmap for your community, for your county, for your neighborhood. You're at point A and want to get to point B, and you have your comp plan, and it's something that communities use more than some other communities. So some communities are very active in their comp plans and utilizing their comp plans as they make decisions, as they make political decisions. But the best communities are the ones that continually update their comp plans, their master plans, and stick to what the plan says, even in tough political decisions. Next slide. And this is one of the best quotes. Daniel Burnham, he's an architect in Chicago. Many years ago, did a lot of great planning work in Chicago, but basically make no little plans. They have no magic to stir man's blood, make big plans, aim high and hope and work. So basically, if you don't, it's kind of like a business not having a business plan. It's the same as a community. If you don't have a comp plan, if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. That's another quote. I think that's from a movie, but this is a good quote. And a lot of times, planners catch a lot of flack, and communities catch a lot of flack for some of the plans they do. Some people don't think they're attainable, but because they're maybe too touchy-feely or don't have the right information in them, or don't seem that they're attainable. But if you don't have goals and plans to become better than what you are today as a community, you'll never get there. Next slide. So for example, and it's for me to talk about things, and especially about comp plans, it's best to show examples. So I was doing some digging on the internet when I was putting this together, and I've been in Hastings many a times. I've never worked there, never helped them out, but actually know some people on staff at the City of Hastings, and so I used their comprehensive plan as an example. Next slide. And also, I picked it because I think we said this in our meetings before, but we want everyone to drink the Kool Aid for making Nebraska more walkable. So what a better place than Hastings to use an example. So next slide. So what they in Hastings, they call it Imagine Hastings, and there was a company, I believe, out of Lawrence, Kansas, or out of Kansas City, that developed this comp plan. This is the cover of it, and we could certainly send out links if anyone wants to take a look at this of their comp plan. Next slide. So this is what's included generally. There's other chapters beyond the natural environment that you see here, but Chapter 2.1 is a good framework to talk about comp plans. Comp plans, master plans are not required by state law in Nebraska. They are required if you want to regulate uses, if you want to basically make decisions in your community and tell property owners kind of what to do. So there's different components by state law that are required, such as future land use, transportation, growth, parks and recreation, housing, and some communities, they just follow those state dictated areas or elements that are needed. In other communities, they go above and beyond. And usually the basis for all this is the vision and the community values. That's what you start with. You do a SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. You develop that vision for the community with the citizens and develop community values. And then based upon all that information, you come up with all those other sections, future land use, mobility, and so on. Next slide. So this is an example of their future land use, and basically that is their aspirational way they want to grow in the future. It's broken up into different land use types, residential, commercial, public, parks and recreation, and things like that. These are usually pretty similar from community to community. It just depends on how they're put together and which consultant puts it together. Next slide. And then there's also mobility. You identify different types of streets in your community. Depending on the size of your community, you may or may not have transit. Transit could be a component of it, but most communities in Nebraska don't have transit, so it's mostly the different types of streets in your community. Highways, arterial streets, meaning a more major street. Sometimes within the mobility element, you include trails. If you really want to get detailed, in which I hope more communities in Nebraska do, they start identifying bike facilities, both on-street and off-street bike facilities. And then some communities even go to the point of identifying pedestrian streets. They identify those streets that are heavily used by pedestrians, so that's a good element to have as well. Next slide. And then also I talked about growth a little bit, and it's always a good idea for communities to identify if they're going to grow and where they're going to grow and how that's going to happen, how they're going to serve it with sewers and water, and also how they're going to serve it through transportation and hopefully active transportation corridors, as we've been talking about through the Nebraska Walkable Communities effort we've all been involved with. Next slide. And another good thing that communities, again, this isn't required, but if I were to develop a new master plan or update a master plan or comp plan for a community, usually you have strategies and then you put time frames on them. So in the next 5 years, what are you going to do the next 10 years plus? Is it a one-time effort? Say if you want to make a trail extension, when is that going to happen? Is it going to be ongoing? And then who's responsible to make it happen? So it's always a good idea to have this, I call this time and responsibility matrix. And most comp plans and master plans have these today if they were done in the last 10 years or so. Next slide. Also, what comp plans and master planning, what they do for communities is they provide the basis of law. So if a community makes a decision and it's just arbitrary, or it's just they thought it was a good idea but they didn't really have a basis to make that decision, say make a pedestrian connection between two neighborhoods and the neighborhoods fight it on both sides, if the community doesn't have a comp plan that told them that's a good idea to do or has policy to supporting that, it's less likely to stand up in court. But if you have a comprehensive plan and you've gone through the process with citizen input and developed that comp plan adopted by your village board or city council or county board, it's more likely to stand up in court. So when you make decisions in communities with comp plans, you have that cover. You have that fallback to basically say, we have reasons that we made this decision. Next slide. I don't know about you, but in my house, whoever controls the remote controls the house. No, I'm just kidding. But it's also, comp plan's also a way for communities to control their future. When they want to do things, they have a comp plan. That's a way where citizens can be involved and citizens have ownership in their community, and that's done through comp planning process. Next slide. So finally, I'm going to wrap up here. There was a story about almost a little over 2 years ago. This is a shot from Pilger, Nebraska. There are two twin F4 tornadoes. I think they're F4. They might have been F5s. Tornadoes that tore through Pilger, Nebraska. Next slide. This is just east of Norfolk, Nebraska, to kind of give you a place where that is. It's northeast Nebraska. and so the tornadoes tore through the community, basically destroyed 75% of the community. Next slide. And just kind of gives you some shots. These are some shots that I found on the internet. In the next slide. It's not a very big community. I think it was around 400 people before the tornado. Then it went to less than half of that, and they're slowly getting back. But you can see basically Main Street there where the grain silos were. The school was destroyed, the church, most of the housing. But the reason I bring this up, Pilger's a good example. In 1996, next slide, they developed their first comprehensive plan ever. I think it was 96, mid-90s. And ever since then, they've had the same planning commissioners. What planning commissioners are is a separate board from the city council. They just make recommendations to the city council. So if someone wants to do something in the community, the planning commission in that community has to make a recommendation to the city council, and the council ultimately approves it. But prior to 96, they didn't have a planning commission. They didn't have a comprehensive plan. After 96, until the date of the tornadoes, they had a strong planning commission. They had people that were involved, even though they're a very small community. The same people stayed involved from the beginning of their comprehensive planning process. And the reason I use this example, this tornado, basically, these tornadoes destroyed the community. And after that, because of their comp plan, a lot because of their village clerk, who is awesome, that kept the planning process going, stayed current with the comp plan, they've been able to rebuild pretty quickly over time. Those people that wanted to stay and rebuild and do things and make improvements, I think a lot of it is because of that comp plan that was developed in 96 and the people that were involved. So a lot of it's the citizens that develop the comp plans and the administrators within the community that keep it current, keep it going. And so this is just one example. It's very different than walkable communities, but it's an example of why it's important to have comp plans, have master plans, and make sure the public is involved in ultimately developing those comp plans. That's my last slide. I'll turn it over to Julie next, but we'll answer any questions later that you would have.
Thanks, Derek. Let's see if I can get this to advance. There we go. Okay, so I'm Julie Harris. I'm the director of the Nebraska Bicycling Alliance and a member of the Walkable Communities Steering Committee, and doing a lot of work across the state with our different communities that are involved. And my role in a lot of this work is to take a look at the comp plans of our cities that we're working with and sort of evaluate them and figure out what language exists in the comp plans of these cities that might support the walking and biking agendas that their stakeholders are creating through this process. Look to see if there are opportunities for the advocates in those cities to get involved and make some changes if there's a update coming or something of that sort. So as a steering committee, we kind of decided to move forward with this and knew that we needed to sort of come up with a process by which each city's plan was evaluated. And we found that in the state of South Carolina, they had a really great project not too long ago that did something very similar, where they evaluated comp plans, and they determined, you know, what specific benchmarks they would be looking for, and kind of set up a really great system to say, you know, this is the tool we're going to use to evaluate, and we're going to see how everybody stands up to this. Here's an example of what we kind of dug into the weeds and did. We came up with a list of different criteria that we would be looking for in each comp plan as we reviewed them for the cities in Nebraska. We determined which one of the objectives from the South Carolina model that we thought were applicable to the work we were doing, pulled those out, and came up with some ways to assess and give a score to each of those. And that shows you, this slide kind of shows you the matrix that we created to do that. The 6 cities, just as a quick reminder that we did this for, we've got Sidney, Lexington, Grand Island, Hebron, Superior and Omaha, Omaha being a specific part of Omaha, east of 42nd Street. And actually, we did not assess the plan in Omaha only because it had recently been given a very thorough working over by people who were looking to create a complete streets plan and some other things that were happening. So we knew that that work had already been done in Omaha, so that saved me the time of having to dig through all of that. So now I just want to go through very quickly and kind of give a couple of aha moments or highlights that we found as we looked at each of the plans of those cities that I just mentioned. And what's really interesting is that Derek talked a little bit earlier about how if a city doesn't have goals, you know, they don't have a good roadmap to get there. And so what I was really looking at to see is what are the goals that are laid out in these cities' comp plans, and do they have bike and pedestrian corresponding language or goals that support the overall vision that where the city wants to go. And so that was really fascinating to see. Do they have things that support it, or are they missing some pretty key connections that could be easily made to support the vision through bike and pedestrian projects? And that was what's been, those were the big aha moments that I'll talk about here. Superior, Nebraska is a small community on in sort of, I guess, south central Nebraska, almost on the Kansas border. Their plan, as I reviewed it, was a superior plan, and it was written by our friends at RDG here in Omaha. Marty Schukert was the consultant that did the plan, and I've said many times in many places that if there was a Mount Rushmore of bicycling in Omaha, Marty would be the George Washington. He gets it. He's a nationally known expert. So their plan, it did not surprise me that their plan was so well put together. And you can see here that they've got plans for biking and walking and for creating an architectural walk. Superior's known for having several historic Victorian homes throughout the city, and they created a way that they could create a walking plan that would take tourists and visitors around their city to highlight these key beautiful homes. So they've really done a great job. So Superior really does have a rock star blueprint in their hands that they can use as they plan for the future. Now it becomes a matter of making sure that they stick to it and that they try to find creative ways to sort of bring it to life. So for Superior, it's probably more of a funding question to find out how they can make this real. Lexington's plan, what I found in Lexington was I was blown away by the data that was in their plan. Basically, we found out that 6.8% of the population in Lexington, according to a census survey, 6.8% walk and bike as their main form of commuting. And the bike-specific number for that was 1.5% use their bicycle to commute for their job. And that might seem really small, but that's actually equivalent to the percentage that Chicago has. And Chicago's pretty high up in the list of bikeable communities, bikeable cities in the country. That really blew me away. And what I was really pleased to see, their plan really talked about the unique socioeconomic things that they have going on in Lexington and really addressed the opportunities for equity to make sure that all of their citizens had a safe way to walk and bike. You can see on this map here, running right through the middle of Lexington is Highway 30 and the railroad, and that's pretty common in Nebraska, smaller towns, to have that happen. But the main residential area of Lexington is north of that spot, and a lot of the key industrial and employment areas are south. And they at some point recently rebuilt their overpass. And you can see here that they did a really great job of making sure that that overpass had a safe way to allow people on foot and people on bike to get across, not just to get the cars and the trucks across. And anecdotally, we were hearing that a lot of the bike commuting that was happening was over this viaduct because a lot of the meatpacking plant and a lot of other industrial areas were on the other side. So, you know, for Lexington to address those equity issues in their plan and then build accordingly really is giving them the chance to make sure that all of their citizens have a chance to participate in the economy and to have great jobs. In Hebron, their plan talked a lot about wanting to find out ways to attract and retain their young people. Brain drain is a common theme in Nebraska as a state and in small towns. Hebron was no exception. As you can see here, I took a screenshot of a Google Earth image of the town of Hebron, sort of the core town, the oldest part of town. You can see the school is right there in the upper right corner. And they've got a really great grid system. They've got great streets that don't meander and turn into cul-de-sacs and such. And if you look real close, you can see sidewalk connections that lead right to the school. I think there's a park right there as well, or a church. So, you know, in theory, this is fantastic. This is great for biking and walking, especially in a small town. But if you go and you look at the part of town that's newer, up a little bit farther north, you can see now where the more suburban model of growth has started, where we've got some cul-de-sacs, we've got some, you know, streets that don't always connect with each other. And as I dug in a little bit closer, you can see, you know, these great new neighborhoods, but there's no sidewalks. So there's a missed opportunity there. We know that younger families and the millennial generation, a lot of research is showing that this generation that they want to attract and retain wants to be able to walk and bike safely. They don't want to have to be in their car all the time. So there's a misconnection there between their goal of wanting to attract and retain young people and the way they're building. Grand Island. We've been doing a lot of work. I was just there yesterday and super excited about the work that they're doing to come together and work on developing a complete streets policy for their city. Grand Island's plan was fantastic. It looked a lot at their fantastic trail system. They recognize that the trails that they have in their city are very popular. They're very widely used. And they want to find ways to expand and enhance their trail system. They totally understand the value and the resource they have there. The issue then is trying to make the connection between the trail system being purely recreational and having it be a transportation opportunity for their citizens. They've got a downtown redevelopment study that talks about improving their trail system. But then there's a great downtown redevelopment plan, but there's no connection between, oh, you know what, if we could use our trail system to connect to the downtown, that could help revitalize and enhance our downtown redevelopment efforts. And so again, looking at those values and those goals and taking a step back and saying, how do bicycle and pedestrian issues fold into that, and how can we make those connections? Sidney, we found right on track. They have got a plan that really understands the importance of safe routes to school and making sure that kids have safe ways to walk and bike to school. They have a lot of language in there that talks about the importance of making the connections to the major employment areas, being Cabela's, and we all know that there's a lot of questions hanging in the air about the future of Cabela's. Cabela's looms large in their comprehensive plan. So that whatever decision comes down on Cabela's might be sort of the economic version of the Pilger tornadoes that Derek mentioned earlier. And you know, Sidney's going to have to rely on their goals and their vision for their city to go back and look at that plan if something happens with Cabela's and see what they can do to revitalize and move forward. I think that's all I had here. We do have some more cities that are coming online to review. I think Kearney, Scottsbluff, and Harvard, Nebraska are coming on board. Looking forward to diving into their plans and seeing what they have to say for what their vision is.
Excellent, Julie. And we also have Fairbury coming on board as well, which just got confirmed yesterday. So very excited about that. I'm going to talk and give a little bit of filler while Julie moves the screen share over to Chris and gets that ready, and then we'll go to Chris for your presentation, and then come back to the group for Q&A. So remember, you can get your questions answered by putting them into the chat box, or you can send those in via Twitter using hashtag WalkInE. And I think we're ready to go with Chris.
Okay, everybody hear me and my screen is up and everything, we're all good, right?
I think we're good. Julie, you see Chris's screen? I'm not able to see from my vantage point.
Yep, we're good.
Okay,
great.
excellent. Chris, you're good to go.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Half of my family was born and raised in Nebraska, and my grandfather and I could always talk Nebraska football, so I feel a certain kinship for sure, despite being in Idaho. The work that I've done in the last 10 years has definitely been in active transportation, i.e. biking and walking. One of my great passions is to take people and go on a simple walk and lead them through a technical discussion on what I see often in their own communities as what's working well, what could be improved, and maybe what some shortfalls are. And often that leads to some really good discussions and ultimately good positive changes, so much so that we've actually developed a technical workshop on how to do that sort of thing for yourselves. So what I'm going to do today is show you 3 different communities, starting with a large community and working our way toward a smaller community, and give you some examples of how this particular approach, doing a walk audit, can help bring a vision and a plan to reality as you kind of walk your own streets and see what's actually happening. So I'm going to start in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is approximately about 500,000-600,000, and the entire region is well over probably a million and a half or so. The Metropolitan Planning Organization brought me in about a year ago to kick off a discussion on their long-range transportation plan, which was going to be done in collaboration with the city's general or master plan. And they asked me where I wanted to go to do this discussion and walk. And it was pretty simple. I chose a place called Liberty Park, which I'll show you an overview in a minute. But here are some images of Liberty Park. It's one of the best parks I've ever seen. It's a mile long by a half-mile wide, and it includes everything you could ever imagine. It has a paved trail all the way around it. It has a chip trail that parallels it all the way around it, an aviary. It has, tennis courts, you name it. It is absolutely just one of the best places I've seen. So here's an overview of it, and it's located in a part of Salt Lake City that has housing flanking it in all 4 sides in an older part of town, been around for quite some time. So when we got to looking at that, and what I've used as an example of this is here you have this absolute gem of an asset within Salt Lake City. However, if you look closer, you see on one entire side for a full mile this particular highway. And in this instance, this highway is a 6-lane highway, higher volume. And if you notice real carefully, there are absolutely no crossings whatsoever. So often in the general plan, we'll use language that talks about accessibility and optimizing our public investments and that sort of thing, and connecting our neighborhoods and having thriving communities and opportunities. Those types of languages are common in master plans. But in this case, the ball has been dropped pretty hard, and there literally are no crossings and opportunities for the people who are facing that park and staring at it on a daily basis to get across. And so you have, and it's even worse in the sense that there is a 6-foot-high planter median all the way down that is a flat-out wall. So what happens is, despite the proximity, people are generally more inclined to actually get in their car. as you know, you may know, Salt Lake City has a significant air quality issue, and local trips like that are actually some of the worst causes of air quality problems. But people aren't getting an opportunity to just simply walk right across the street, or bike right across the street and participate in all the things the park has to offer. So as a result of this walk audit, the city and the NPO we're going to begin coordinating to look at the opportunities to make those changes and improve connections. Moving on to a city here in Idaho, Coeur, Idaho, which is up in our panhandle. This is a town of about 50,000 people, and they have brought me in as part of a master plan process to look at a particular corridor, and this is Sherman Avenue, and what you're looking at now is an older part of the town in downtown, and as you can tell by the density of the buildings, the grid to an extent you can kind of see there, and then in the lower right you see it's a very walkable place, lots of activity taking place, and it's a really good driving location for pedestrians. It's very rich. But as you move to the east, you see how land use has changed. And going back to both Derek and Julie's point earlier about having a vision, well, in this case, this land use took place prior to any general plan, but that vision and what was working in downtown has dropped off. And now you see an opportunity or a location here that is not necessarily walkable, though there are sidewalks. The land use side of things is not optimizing that experience. Furthermore, when we went out and we did the walk, that's the mayor, by the way, with the hula hoop. It's the visual tool I like to use to demonstrate that everybody kind of has a buffer space that they need when prepping for a sidewalk or crossing. When we did the walk, we went out and I looked at one specific area with this group, and what you see in the lower left is a crosswalk that's in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. 35 miles an hour, by the way, and pedestrians really don't mix. If you were to be hit and struck by a vehicle traveling at 35 miles an hour, your chances of not making that through are pretty high. I'd say 70 to 75% or even greater. At 40 miles an hour, you'd actually be about 90%. There's also the minimal treatment, as you see with the crosswalk. It's not very visible, and you can see that from here. At ground level, it's hardly even noticeable, especially at 35, 40 miles an hour for vehicles. Again, the general plan will talk often about schools and students and being able to provide a walkable community for folks to walk back and forth and to access different land uses. In the lower right, you see that brown roofed building. That is actually a senior complex. It's not any kind of a hospice center. It's just senior living. And there's a park just to the north. And you also see the school crossing sign. So that crosswalk serves both senior citizens and students, potentially. In that case, elementary school students. And in both cases, they're going to be a little bit slower than the average walker. So you have a crosswalk that really is inefficient and ineffective, rather, for both groups and even just the general public at large. So as part of the result of that, they're in the process of upgrading that. So the first thing was change the paint, and so make it a more high visibility crossing, and also add what's called a rectangular rapid splash beacon, and that's a technical term for what you see on the lower right, which is just a push-button activated device that, again, raises awareness. In addition to that, they're actually going in as part of that result, or the resulting walk audit and recommendations, and going through and redoing the corridor so that instead of it just being, it is what it is, and we're going to just let, react to vehicles and motorists going 35 miles an hour. No, we're going to actually be proactive and design the street in a way that encourages the motorists to travel the speed that we want them to go. And in that case, closer to 25 miles an hour, which is a lot better and more hospitable for people who are choosing to walk. The last community I want to highlight is Mackay, Idaho. And Mackay is a town of 500 people, and so pretty rural, in a very scenic place. They brought us in as part of a Safe Routes to School effort that was then also going to move forward into more of a general planning process. And as part of that, I led a walk audit with that group of people you see in the lower right. The gentleman there in the, I guess, pink, red shirt, whatever, he is the Public Works Director. He's also the Volunteer Fire Department Chief, and he's also the baseball coach. So that happens in a smaller community. And he was instrumental in our walk, and they wanted us to look at this particular route that connected downtown area to a school zone, and it went also along a park. And so what we did as part of that walk is do the assessment and came up with some recommendations. And in that case, you know, we're always very careful in terms of what we recommend to try to put things out there that are possible. In that case, you don't have a community that's able to put together tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what we recommended to start off with was simple paint. So that same gentleman, as I just showed you, literally took his baseball chalk marker and went out. They got all the paint necessary, and they striped the roads, and they actually created a shoulder, just as what you see, and they put in additional signing and a crosswalk. We launched that with International Safe Routes to School Walk to School Day, which is in October. The community has been extremely proactive and positive in terms of the result, and more importantly, the biggest problem that they had was with motorists who were going too fast on that road, and that's the reason why, is because it was a blank canvas and it encouraged speed. Now there are lines on the road that actually, again, encourage motorists to travel the speed that we want. And as part of that, again, walking has increased, bicycling has increased to school, but it's not like it's the end-all, be-all. Their general plan is then going to go in and identify a more permanent facilities such as sidewalks and so forth. But you have to start somewhere, and that was where I want to show one more image here, because this is what it looks like today, and it's an important thing to note. You know, and you can see that a lot of that paint has started to fade. And unfortunately, that's one of those things where you got to understand that maintaining these facilities is just as critical as putting them down. And so thinking that through, and whether it's resources, budget, what have you. But anyway, point being is those things can't just be out there for a couple years. We got to be able to make sure that we can keep them up. So briefly, I just wanted to give you an overview of the power of a walk and how important it can be to just bring about a good discussion, get people out of a building, get them out of a classroom with their meeting in a public space or a city council chambers or something, and actually go out and walk your own community. See what's out there. Watch, the reaction of people. Live it, smell it, breathe it, and understand what's happening, and hopefully try to put those pieces together from the goals of a general plan into what your community actually is and how you can do that. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. And again, a big thank you to Chris and Julie and Derek for taking time out of their busy schedules to talk with you today. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. Julie, I know you're taking back the control of the screen, and we should have the Q&A slide up there. Julie, has there been anything that you've seen come in from the chat so far that we want to start with questions? And then if not, we'll move to actually unmuting some participants and giving that discussion a chance to happen.
I don't see anything so far.
Okay. So if you've got a question that you want to ask the panelists, feel free to raise your hand, and Julie can unmute you and bring you into the conversation. I believe you can just click raise hand on the pad in front of you, and Julie, you should be able to see those coming in. Let me start with a question while we're waiting to see if anybody else has anything. And my question for you guys, when you're, and I'm going to actually ask each of you to just give 30 seconds on it, if you will, but what is the biggest way that a leader in their community can influence their master plan for their community? Like, what's the biggest thing that I can do, either as a leader in my community or even as a resident, that's going to help to create the change we need in a community's master plan? I don't know. I know it's kind of a general question, but really thinking about the idea that people have to prioritize, what is that biggest thing that they can do? Let's start with you, Julie, and then we'll go to Chris and Derek, and hopefully by then we'll have other questions coming in.
I would take sort of a selfish view and just say, if you are somebody who cares about the bicycle and pedestrian goals for your community, I would say the best thing that you could do is to take that on and hold on tight and hold strong to that, and make sure that that those issues get discussed, that they get addressed in the plan, that they don't get forgotten, they don't get glossed over. Be that champion, find some other champions that can help you, that can help have your back, and hold on tight and don't let go.
Okay. And Derek, anything to add from your side? And then we'll go to you, Chris, and then we'll come back and see if we've got other questions. Derek, are you there? I think you might be on mute.
Yep, I'm on mute. I'm sorry. Yeah, the biggest thing that I would say is know that you can change your community. Most people, even in small communities, big communities, it doesn't matter what size, I think that a lot of people think that they can't change their community. Well, you can, and the best way to do that is to do everything that Julie said, but also get in contact with your administrators at the city, the elected leadership, and if your community is not doing things that'll create the community more walkable or bikeable, tell them that that's something that they need to consider. And sometimes you have to provide education to these elected leaders. Some already believe it. In some of the communities, there are actual elected leaders that believe it, that do it. There's a bunch in Nebraska right now. But I would say that would be your first step, besides believing that you can make change happen, is also get in contact with your leadership, your elected leadership, and let them know that this should be a community priority because of X, Y, and Z.
Excellent. And Chris, any thoughts from you?
Sure. I guess what I would say is try to be able to think about these issues from varying perspectives. So if you have an issue with a school, if you have seniors in your community, a higher population of seniors, for example, there's an economic argument to be made and so forth. So if you can think about how your community would be best served by improving walking rates and bicycling rates, that resonates with decision makers especially. And so, for example, in the economic piece of it, walking and bicycling, in my opinion, represent a freedom, especially an economic freedom. It's one of the reasons why I choose to walk or bike, because I don't want to pay for gas. I don't want to have to pick up a vehicle and drive it more than I necessarily have to. But if my community isn't built in a particular way that encourages that and allows that, then it's basically forcing me into a decision that I don't always want to make. And so, but being able to frame the argument in varying ways is an important thing, because you never know what's going to register with a decision maker or somebody who's helping draft a plan, or even your fellow citizens. So something to think about.
Excellent. And a big reminder, we've got 10 minutes left with these guys. I want you to be able to take advantage of that. Get your questions in that chat box if you've got questions for these guys, or you can also send them in on Twitter using the hashtag WalkNE for Walk Nebraska. Julie, how are we doing on the question side from your perspective? Do we have any questions coming in?
Still no questions. We must have just answered everything. We must be great presenters.
Excellent. And nobody's got their hands raised.
No hands raised.
Oh, I like when you guys do such a great job. It also means I have to come up with questions. Okay, here we go. So, okay. All right, so Derek, you work in planning. what tips might you give to other city leaders when they're thinking about their master planning process? And actually, all of you can weigh in on this one as well, but what tips would you give to other city leaders as far as how to really go about engaging the community in those planning processes and in the master planning processes?
Yeah,
I know I'm totally putting you on the spot.
Oh no, that's fine. That's as a planner, that's something we struggle with all the time, is to get people to be involved. And people usually get involved when things are happening that they don't like. So we've always said, well, we should start a rumor saying that they're going to build this chicken plant right outside town, and then get people to show up and then say, no, we're just kidding. We want to talk about walking and biking. But no, we would never do that. But it's difficult, especially today. There's different ways about doing it, using social media, having public meetings are some of the ways to do it. But yeah, it is a difficult thing. I think it's actually easier in smaller communities because in my experience in the past and working in parts of Nebraska, people would actually show up in some of these smaller towns. Remember in Lyons, Nebraska, we'd get like half the town show up to our planning meetings. But I would just, the best way to do it is just say that empowering your citizen base and letting them know that they can have an impact on the community, and then leaving it up to them and just having conversations. And a lot of times you have to go to them. So in most communities, they have neighborhood meetings, they have Kiwanis Club meetings. So that's probably the best first step, is just to go to them. And the first thing you can do to talk about walking and biking, and more specifically walking, is talk about the value. And Chris talked about it. There's economic value in walkable communities. That's what the preference is today, and it's growing every day. And the same thing goes for bikeability. So I think it's first go to them, go to their meetings. Sometimes you may have to hijack their meeting, but that's fine. You got to do what you got to do. But I would start with when you're talking with them, just talk about the value of walkable communities and what can be done. Right now in Nebraska, most small towns, most rural counties are losing population, and one of the best ways to reverse that is to create economic value in communities and create great places, because that's really what it comes down to, is creating great places. But back to the public engagement, is just go to them and figure out where they're going to be, and just have conversations.
Well, I think, you know, Derek, to kind of piggyback off what you're saying, while Julie and Chris are thinking if they've got anything to add to that, I think it's, you know, as we saw in the recent AARP report that was released, that's really important to both seniors and to young people, is they want to be able to walk to the store. They want to be able to do things in their community. And so you've got the data that backs up that statement that, you know, that we're losing population. This is a good way for some of our smaller cities and towns in Nebraska to be able to look at retaining their population. Julie, anything to add on this question?
I would just say that it's important to keep the conversation going about how walking and biking is more than just a recreation issue. It's something that we find sort of gets lost in translation quite a bit if you're not really proactive about it. It's a transportation issue from an equity perspective. It's a transportation issue for kids and for seniors, just across the board. So it's just to keep that message front and center is really important.
We've got about 6 minutes left, and if you've got a burning question for our panelists, please make sure you get that in via chat box or via Twitter at hashtag WalkNE. Chris, one of the things that really fascinates me about what you're doing is you talked about the 2-block walk, or this idea that, you know, how can we get people to really experience what that process looks like and how their master plan can be helpful to them. I wonder if you've got any tips to share with our public engagement strategists, if you will, on best ways to engage the public in that conversation.
Well, oftentimes, unfortunately, we a lot of times see our communities right through our windshield as we're driving through it or by it. And that's a problem because you don't get a chance to really take it all in. And when you slow down and you see foot by foot, block by block, you really, really have an eye-opening experience. You know, for example, putting a mayor in a wheelchair and having them cross the street, instantly the mayor understands why it's important for an ADA compliant community. You know, they get it. And it's not even just that, it's mom's pushing strollers, dad's pushing strollers. That's another issue why ADA, you know, would be important. So I don't know. To me, I can't encourage folks enough is to just think about your community, think about the good, think about the not so good, and look at both. Be honest. Hold a mirror up to your community to truly see what you are and where you want to be. If you think you have examples of some good things, what are the assets, what are the attributes of those good, positive places? How do you replicate those? You know, what is good driven by private development? Was it driven by the city? Who was it maybe driven by? And how does your master plan memorialize those attributes so that those things can be repeated into the future? And then on the other side, if you know something that isn't so good, why? What's happening there? Walk it, see it and feel it, and understand and be able to convey to others, you know, what is happening there to prevent those things from happening again and again. More memorialize that in a plan to prevent those types of places from occurring again.
Excellent. And Julie, I'm going to check back with you to make sure I don't have any questions coming in or hands raised with a burning question.
No burning questions.
All right. Excellent.
If I can, I would like to actually ask or answer the other question that you had too with regard to public involvement. And if Derek's point is well taken, it's always a challenge. I can tell you one area that we've had some success in that frankly got a little lucky, but man, have I used the heck out of it since then. And that is, believe it or not, is engaging students at schools with an art contest. And that is having the students draw, you know, what the street looks like out in front of their school, for example. And in one community, we got the mayor involved, and we had an auditorium filled with kids and their parents, and that was the big draw because we were giving away prizes, and we wanted the parents to come in and discuss with us the things that were happening in the community. So clearly, it was a sort of a Trojan horse idea, but the kids were all over it. We had 3 walls covered with 4 rows high of drawings from these kids. And that is extremely sobering because when kids are honest and they will tell you exactly what they're seeing out there, much to the chagrin of parents who probably didn't even realize that that's the perspective their own kids have. And even the mayor was blown away by what he was seeing. And so it absolutely helped in the discussion. We got more parents there. We got way more feedback. And it was something relatively simple. And that was in a community of, I think it was about, probably about 8,000 or so. So a modest-sized community, you know, and so it can certainly be done. Sometimes you just got to think outside the box a bit.
That's awesome. I appreciate, Chris, you sharing that with us. And like I said, a big thanks to Julie and to Derek and to Chris. I've had the opportunity to really get to know you guys over the last year, and especially Julie and Derek a little bit more so, I think, than what Chris and I have. But I've worked with all 3 of you, and you're just a wealth of knowledge. And I encourage any of you guys really take a look at what they're giving you and ways that you can use this advice to your advantage, ways that you can tap into that. Kism shared some really great strategies with us today, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to do that. So what's upcoming? Well, we are onboarding new communities. So we have 4 new communities that are starting in this process. We've already had 7 that have went through the process and are in the implementation phase. seeing lots of great successes so far. So if you want more information about that, definitely let me know. And a big shout out to all of our local health department leaders and to Brian Coyle and the rest of the steering committee for this project, as really leaders who are advancing walking, biking, and overall health across Nebraska, and doing it in a very unique way that is driven by the local components of the project, and still has that statewide effect. And so as Chris and Derek have actually alluded to, and even Julie in her comments, it really is about getting the community to own that, and the best way to do that is to get them engaged and buying into the process. The best way to do that is to get them to have that planning conversation. As always, you can find information by doing searches on hashtag WalkInE for Walk Nebraska. We have two remaining calls in our series that are coming up. So we've got Funding 101, which is a webinar that's happening on July 12th from 10:30 to 11:30 Eastern, and that's going to really get into getting into existing funding structures that exist. Existing funding structures that you can use to go after the funding you need for your project. So we'll be hearing from Julie and Brian, and I believe, Julie, we have someone from MAPA who's going to sit in on that.
Yep, Mike Helgerson.
Excellent. So we're excited to hear from Mike on that. That, again, is a webinar-style type format, and then on July 21st from 2 to 3:30 Central, we're going to actually take the funding conversation to the next level and really start diving into a collaborative conversation where you'll have the opportunity to break into small groups and really talk about how can you take the funding that's out there and capitalize on it and use creative funding solutions to get even more funding for your projects. So we've got a couple panelists who will kick that conversation off, but that's more of a collaborative discussion for you guys, not so much a webinar format. We're always excited to get your feedback, and when we end today's call, you're going to get an automatic prompting to complete a survey for today, and of course we'll send out the final presentation and everything for you tomorrow, including the call recording. So thanks so much for joining today. Thanks again to Chris and to Julie and to Derek for your expertise and your wisdom in this area. It's just amazing to work with leaders like you, and I thank you so much for that. This concludes today's webinar. So Julie, if you want to take us off broadcast.